With the release of the 7.4 patch, amongst many other things, Behaviour attempted to rework the Trickster. Whilst with this patch they made many adjustments, I'd argue to you that they made very few changes. Pre-patch, the Trickster was a killer that couldn't compete with his fellow ranged counterparts, had a low skill ceiling, and was disliked by the majority of survivors. After the patch, he's a killer that can't compete with his fellow ranged counterparts, has a low skill ceiling, and is still disliked by the majority of survivors. Despite Behaviour's best efforts, I feel like this character still suffers from many of the same problems he used to, and at some point his design will need to be revisited. For now, I want to throw my hat into the ring, and present a rework concept that would modify his knife throwing, main event, and add-ons, all in hopes of creating a more powerful killer that's more fun to play as and against. A quick preface before we start. I developed this rework concept before the release of Behaviour's 7.4 patch, and so I'll be making some changes that are simply reverting Trickster back to his old self. It didn't feel right putting them in as part of the rework, given that I'm just hitting the undo button. The changes that I'm reversing are as follows. His movement speed will return to 4.4 meters per second, his terror radius will return to 24 meters, the survivor's laceration meter will return to 6 stacks, i.e. it will take 6 knives for a single health state, 30 charges are required to activate the main event now lasts for 10 seconds, combos will no longer contribute to main event's duration. These changes are simply partially returning the Trickster to his pre-7.4 state, although some changes have remained, such as the recoil removal and standardized throw rate. With all that out the way, let's talk about actual reworking. Firstly, we need to talk about knife throwing. This aspect of his power is the meat and potatoes of the Trickster's gameplay, and it can frustrate both sides in different ways. On the killer's side, the requirement to fill out the laceration meter can lead to many instances in which survivors are left close, but not quite injured or downed because their meter isn't entirely full. These instances can happen at crucial moments and regardless of your performance as a killer. Overall, this leaves him in a state that's weaker than his fellow ranged counterparts. On the survivor's side, this killer's zoning potential combined with the lack of cooldowns means that holding W is often the best counterplay. There is no penalty as the killer for missing your knives, and it's nigh impossible to dodge the 33 knives required to fully deplete him. This means that as a survivor, attempting to dodge his attacks is pointless and can lead to really frustrating gameplay. So, how are we going to address all this? Well, there are a considerable number of changes I'd suggest. First are the general buffs. Starting with the simple one, the default carry amount for knives should be 60. Why? Well, at the moment the Trickster can only carry 44, and this leaves him in a strange position. He can be almost certain to down one survivor, but can't really pressure beyond that. If a survivor comes for a flashlight save, you can't use your power effectively in the same way a huntress can, for example. Increasing the carry amount would mean that a Trickster could more effectively deal with protection hits, flashlight saves, or even risk a second chase without reloading. Next, knives should be 100% accurate. At the moment there is a slight inaccuracy to the knives as they can somewhat deviate from the point you're aiming at. As a survivor this can lead to some cool cinematic moments when the knives fly past you, but as a killer this can be really frustrating. Sometimes a missed knife can be the difference between a down or an extra 20 seconds in chase. So, I'd suggest that knives should always land at the centre of your screen when thrown. This would do a lot to reward Trickster players that are accurate and reduce the amount of frustrating, nearly lacerated moments. Next up is laceration stacks. At the moment the laceration amount is directly tied to knives hit, 1 point of laceration per knife that hits a survivor. I'd suggest that there should be a combo system that sees the knives become more powerful the more knives a Trickster lands without missing. Essentially, laceration stacks is a combo system that rewards players who focus on being more accurate. The amount of laceration inflicted would be according to the current combo, with a cap set on 1.5 laceration. As you can see, landing 5 knives in a row without resetting would be enough to take a health state. Further, once you've reached maximum stacks, 4 knives would be capable of taking a single health state. This effect would reset any time the Trickster misses 2 knives in a row, meaning that survivors who take the time to dodge would immediately be more rewarded than they are at the moment. This effect would also reset after a main event, giving survivors some breathing room. The final set of changes I'd suggest are introducing some cooldowns to the Trickster's power. At the moment the continual flurry of knives can be exceedingly frustrating to play against, especially when you're in a tight spot. Some cooldowns, whilst not too impactful, would give survivors some breathing room in a chase. First, I'd suggest that the Trickster should have a 2.2 second cooldown after taking a health state, during which he performs some cool knife tricks. Here are some entirely unrelated clips for you to consider, dear viewer. This would mean that he can't continue to throw knives after a survivor loses a health state. Important, especially given the possibility of taking a health state with 4 knives under the laceration stacks system. Further, seeing the Trickster perform some knife tricks would be cool from a lore standpoint. Presently, there is no reference to his past knife tricks in gameplay. His lore references it, and some add-ons reference it, but nothing in the gameplay itself shows him performing these knife tricks. Seeing these tricks as part of a cooldown would make him more interesting as a character, as well as reducing frustration in gameplay. The other cooldown I'd suggest is that he should enter a brief cooldown after missing 4 consecutive knives, similar to the cooldown he has after a main event. This would greatly reward survivors who successfully dodge his knives, and give survivors the opportunity to vault a window or throw a pallet without the risk of being hit. A simple cooldown would greatly reduce the frustration felt by players going against this killer, and mean that Trickster players themselves need to be accurate, thereby increasing his skill ceiling and making gameplay more rewarding. Overall, these changes seek to incentivize a better back and forth, with both sides wanting to impact the accuracy of the killer, with killers being more rewarded for accuracy and survivors being rewarded for dodging. This, I feel, would do a lot to improve the fun had on both sides with this killer. The next set of changes are aimed at the main event. Currently, this aspect of his power isn't very interesting. The frequent activation makes it feel less special, and often leads to survivors having to hold W during their chases. Further, the slow movement speed means that it's usually better to close the gap before using it on a survivor and hoping they can't escape, yet more frustrating gameplay. Further, it offers no bonus to hitting survivors with it, except for some extra blood points and saving on some of your knives. I'd suggest a number of changes to make the main event feel more powerful and more special. The first thing is that the charging should be directly tied to laceration stacks. This would mean that, for example, if you landed a knife for 1.5 laceration, you would gain 1.5 charges towards the main event, with 30 charges required to fully charge the main event. This would further reward Trickster players for their accuracy, as more accuracy would increase the speed that main event charges at. Next, I'd suggest that failing to activate a main event should refund 15 charges. At the moment, if you don't activate a main event, you simply lose it. Refunding charges would mean that a Trickster player would be rewarded for waiting until a good opportunity to use main event arises, rather than thinking, well, that was pointless. Deciding whether to use or save your main event would be an actual choice now, rather than feeling like a wasted opportunity. The next 2 changes simply buff the main event in its current form. First is that survivors who are injured by a main event should suffer from the deep wound status effect. This would mean that targeting multiple survivors with a single main event would be more rewarded and increase the killer's slowdown potential slightly. Next is that the Trickster should move at 4 meters per second during a main event. This would mean that he wouldn't lose distance to a survivor during a main event and make it more threatening in chase. Further, survivors would be more incentivized to try and stun him out of his power rather than just holding W. Overall, I feel that these changes would make the main event feel more special, powerful, and reduce the frustration that comes with not being able to use it in certain instances. The final aspect to consider is this killer's add-ons. At the moment they're a bit of a mess. Some are bad, many have repeating effects, and some wouldn't work with this rework concept. Overall, a sweeping add-on pass would be in order to bring his add-ons in line with that of other killers and this rework. But Cameron, I hear you say, only someone who's really lonely would take the time to rework all those add-ons. Well, dear viewer, I'd say I'm qualified, given that I spent Valentine's Day drinking Monster, writing this script, and whacking it to that character from Curtain. Anyway, let's get into the add-ons. First of the brown add-ons is the Trick Pouch. This one simply reduces the time it takes to reload at a locker. A nice quality of life add-on. Next, the Memento Blades will reduce the cooldown after a blade injury by 10%, taking it from 2.2 seconds to approximately 2 seconds. The Killing Part Chords increases the movement speed while throwing blades by 2.5%, a slight increase from its current value. This will take your movement speed from 3.86 meters per second to 3.96 meters per second. Whilst you'll still move slower than a survivor, the distance you lose will be less. The Inferno Wires are a unique add-on. With this add-on, the lullaby becomes static, that is, the music won't change with distance. It's not guaranteed to give you the drop on survivors, but it may throw them off on occasion. Starting off the yellows is the Tequila Moonrock. This one increases the duration of main event by 50%, taking it from 10 seconds to 15. Whilst this is situational, it could have some good chase or snowball potential. The on-target single reduces the post-main event cooldown by 30%, taking it from 5 seconds to 3.5 seconds. This will help greatly with following up from a main event in chase. The Lucky Blade will increase the time it takes for survivors to mend their deep wounds by 4 seconds. By default, deep wounds is only inflicted during a main event, meaning this has some slowdown potential if you spread the damage. G-Wounds Autograph increases the time that the main event stays primed for by 10 seconds. This will take it from 30 to 40 seconds. Essentially, you'll have some more time to make use of the main event before it's gone and charges are refunded. The Caged Heart Shoes increase the Trickster's movement speed while he's out of knives by 5%. This would take his movement speed from 4.4 meters per second to 4.6. Essentially, you still have some chase potential as an M1 killer if you run out of knives. The Waiting For You watch simply allows you to maintain laceration stacks after a main event, meaning that you won't need to build them up again. They'll be waiting for you after the main event. The Ripper Brace hasn't been changed, it still increases the time before laceration begins to decay. Melodious Murder has been buffed to receive the old effect of the Death Throes compilation. Given that 30 charges are required for a main event, this add-on will reduce the downtime, but only in certain instances. The Fizz Spin Soda increases the Trickster's movement speed during a main event by 5%. This takes the movement speed from 4 meters per second to 4.2. This means that with the add-on selected, you'll be able to gain distance on the survivor slightly during a main event, giving it some good chase potential. The Bloody Boa increases the knives available to the Trickster by 12, taking the default carry amount to 72 knives. This would improve the potential for follow-up chases and reduce the need for the Trickster to reload so often. The Trick Blades have received a complete rework. They make it so that it takes longer to build up laceration stacks, but also that they're more difficult to lose. This way, a Trickster is able to play more risky when they've built up their stacks. The Edge of Revival album hasn't been changed. The only additional information is that hits with shattered blades won't increase laceration stacks, but laceration stacks will be accounted for when applying the 50% penalty from this add-on. The Diamond Cufflinks haven't been changed given that they're already a very decent add-on. The Cut Through You single has been reworked given that it was very niche previously. Now it allows for regular knives to apply deep wounds rather than just blades thrown during main event. This way the add-on will have considerable slowdown value if you spread damage. The Iridescent Photo Card has been reworked. Now it provides stealth to the Trickster when main event is primed. This way it will be easier to get the drop on survivors and make better use of main event from close range. The Death Throes compilation now allows for knives landed during a main event to contribute to the next main event. This means that if a Trickster lands 12 knives during the main event, he will already have 12 charges when the cooldown is over. Overall, this add-on pass hopes to improve the variety and capability of this killer's add-ons while offering a number of different playstyles. With such a selection available, it'd be possible to greatly improve certain aspects of this killer's power in a number of ways. Overall, I think this would encourage players to try out a number of different builds and make matches with this killer more unpredictable. That's it for this one. These are all the suggestions I have for addressing the Trickster's current weaknesses as I see them. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, send an email, make a forum post and send a link. Whatever your ideas are, I want to hear them. I don't make this video to declare my ideas as gospel or something, I just hope to maybe inspire some conversations. By discussing our ideas and putting them together, we can get that bit closer to making DBD the best version of itself. Thank you very much for watching, dear viewer, and I hope to see you in the next one.